David Colon. I'm the Academic Dean at Collegiate School in Richmond, Virginia, and I spoke today about strategic planning and disruptive innovation. And the basic point of it, I can sum it up pretty quickly, is we look as a school at some of the threats that we're facing as independent schools. So we looked at things like online education, tuition pressures, and the like, and then ways that our school has tried to address those. And I will say in a lot of ways what we're doing is not terribly exciting in some ways, but I think it seems sort of obvious, but I don't think it's worked its way out in independent schools. We have traditionally looked at strategic plans in terms of 5-year cycles, and I tried to point out in my talk that Stalin had a 5-year plan on there, and it doesn't necessarily work that well, and often you wind up having conversations about things like buy-in. Rather than really doing interesting things, you wind up trying to get people to comply. So instead, we've really got a fairly simple process, but I think its application winds up being fairly difficult and complicated. But it's basically to identify some of the problems that meet the filters of what your school is trying to do, whether that's mission or your values. Then learning about it, and this is the part that seems obvious but often isn't. That as a school, we're learning organizations. And yet a lot of times we as educators and administrators get so caught up in the day-to-day operations of the school that we don't wind up learning. So we've tried as a school to dedicate time to learning, and we divided our group up into 3 separate groups. The first group was a group that went around to places that were different than Collegiate. So we visited schools, but we also visited places like Google or MIT's Media Lab. And we tried to go to even schools that were very different. We didn't want to go to a school that was like Collegiate, but maybe had a better writing program or something. We would go to, for instance, Francis Parker up in Boston. So we had a group that did that. We had another group which was more sort of traditional, and we called it the Great Ideas Group. And they met with authors and some filmmakers about some of the ideas around things like global education, disruptive innovation. We met with a guy named Michael Horn, who worked with Clayton Christensen, the author of the book Disrupting Class. And our last group, we worked with we had them work with Virginia Commonwealth University's Da Vinci Center, which is a collaboration between the VCU's business school, design school, and engineering school, and they work on collaborative projects. And the point there was to get teachers more comfortable with the idea of collaboration. So no, we learned about them. And then the last part, which again seems obvious, but it's just that we started to do stuff. Which again sounds kind of stupid, but in fact do stuff. Unlike just having these really complicated plans of implementation, we took what an author by the name of Peter Sims calls small bets. We had people actually just go out and do things. So, and I showed some examples talking about, for instance, our global education program. We didn't try to set up a blue ribbon panel that had the entire plan mapped out. Here's what curriculum's going to look like, and here's this and that. We used some of our connections to get trips, some of them small, some of them large. We did things, with curriculum where we took some, just some risks and had people just go out and do things. And we didn't try to get everyone on board. I called it building the choir. We need people that are going to support it so it can grow on its own. So basically that's kind of what we talked about, and then I also talked at the end about how do you measure this, and we talked about it being a combination of some real metrics that you do need to look at, whether that is, in our case, standardized test scores, alumni surveys, things like that, but then also the importance of collecting really stories, narratives, of some of the successes. I think that narratives traditionally have a real important role to play in institutions in general, but particularly in independent schools. And how do you make sure that you're gathering those and to some extent bragging about some of the things you're doing? So that's really all I have on that.
How did all of these initiatives help to achieve Collegiate's mission?
I think because we're very clear from a strategic sense of where we want to go as a school, and we had extensive conversations about that. That these things, I think I'm answering this, but we granted a fair degree of autonomy on the tactical level. I tried to distinguish between strategic, which is, say, for instance, global education, the tactical being the implementation, but then that middle ground, which is I call the operational, which means how do you set up processes and procedures. So we tried to make sure that those strategic goals, as I said earlier, were in alignment with what we feel are our values and our mission as a school, and then that we were able to facilitate that. I don't know that that answered that question.
I think it did.
Okay.
I think it did. Awesome. Excellent.
Great,
You're a
thank
superstar.
you.
You're
Yes.
a superstar.
That's it. I guess I can quit my job now.
I think
No
you
need.
can.
I'm going to go tell
Although
Keith
I have
right
to
now.
tell you,
It's over.
you get a sticker.
Oh, wow. Look at
Yeah,
that.
look at that. You
Look
can
at
bribe
that
any
swag
kid
on
with
my-
a sticker.